are going to, right, I'm going to address first, all those of you who are going to give presentations. I will not mention you by name because there are many of you, but I also want to mention all the brothers and sisters, who are part of this webinar. On behalf of the World Council of Churches, management, I want to welcome you all to the webinar, whose title is Commitment 3, Churches' Engagement for Intergenerational Climate Justice and the Environment, Supporting Initiatives for and with Children and Adolescents. I come from Malawi in Southern Africa. Recently, Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe were hit by an intense tropical cyclone, Idai, which is described as one of the worst tropical cyclones on record to affect Africa and the Southern Hemisphere. As a result, more than 1,000 people died and thousands more are missing. And the cyclone's exact death toll is expected never to be known, okay, because of the context, of Southern Africa. And we know that, many of those, who died are children. And most of these children died during the cyclone itself, but also after the cyclone because of the waterborne diseases. And children, we know, are the more exposed than adults to the impact of climate change. Children are the most affected, by diseases which increase with climate change and pollution. And so for me, the issues of climate change are not just, academic or head thing, but it's something that touches my heart, because I see it happening, in the side of the world where I come from. But at the same time, I'm also glad, to see the huge response that is coming, from those countries that are declaring a climate emergency. We know that at the moment we have, 594 jurisdictions in 13 countries that have declared, climate emergency. We can only hope that there will be much more, many more countries that will make this decision. And at the same time, we are also made aware that there are some contradictions, okay, especially for those of us who are activists. Last week, I was part of the ACT Alliance meeting, and we were talking about how we, as people of faith, are contributing towards climate change. And we realized that whilst we are listening to the messages that are coming from the young people, telling us that we need to change our lifestyles and be part of the movement that is conscious of climate change. At the same time, we are traveling too much, from one country to another, attending all sorts of meetings. And just, the few of us who were in that room, we were saying that, from January to now, most of us have traveled by air more than 20 times. So much as we are activists, for climate justice, our lifestyles have not changed. And that's the contradiction that the young people are bringing to our attention, that, change must begin with us, activists, so that our lifestyles are in line with what we are lobbying about. And then there's also, a clear contradiction in the way we are doing our banking. We are still supporting banks that are involved in the use of, fossil fuels. And it's high time that we also, changed our actions, to make sure that, what we are saying is in line with what the realities of what's going on. We know for sure that churches can and need to be prophetic by supporting young people in their efforts and their initiatives for the planet. It is a 12-year-old girl, Anu Du, in the US, who has invested last year a machine that helps clean oceans from plastic, and a 19-year-old Boyon Slat, who started the Ocean Cleanup Foundation. So we need to listen to the changes that are being made by young people. Let us model excellent ecological stewardship within our churches and to the world by promoting systems and behaviors that are eco-friendly and adaptive to the impact of climate change. For this earth has been given to us to till it and keep it. And I'm reminded of, Psalm 24, that talks about the world belongs to, the earth belongs to God and everything that is in it. And God has given us as Christians the stewardship to take care of this earth. I hope that the testimonials and exchanges in this webinar will help promote this vital transformation, and that the spirit of Pentecost will support us in all these endeavors. And I'm particularly grateful to the UNICEF, for the partnership and collaboration to organize this webinar, but also to work hand in hand with the WCC in promoting the church's commitment to children. So I wish you all the best as we continue the conversation. I will disappear for a few minutes to go to another meeting, but I'll come back because I'm really passionate about climate justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Katharina, over to you. Can you hear us and can you speak?
Yes.
Okay.
I can speak. It is telling me again that the video is not available, but it's okay. Thank you so much. Thank you to Isabel and to all of you for being here today. This webinar is part of a series of webinars that WCC and UNICEF organize in order to support member churches in building their capacity and exchanging their knowledge and experiences and lessons learned in the implementation of the church's commitments to children. The one of UNICEF and WCC has been a long journey. It started a few years ago, and the church's commitments to children were really the flagship initiative of our partnership. And it's a way to support WCC member churches in their action for children. It is very important, I think, that out of the three areas that the commitments are focusing, one is protecting the planet for our children, one is climate justice, and this is particularly relevant for UNICEF. My colleague Gautam will talk more about this, but the one of climate change and climate justice is a fairly recent area for the UN and for UNICEF, and as UNICEF we decided to engage in this area because we simply recognize that it's a violation. What is happening is a violation of children's rights, the right to life, the right to a future, the right to have a planet in which to live and a healthy life. So we are trying to do what we can to, especially to empower young people and adolescents to listen to their concerns and listen to the solutions that very often they promote. So without further ado, I would like to start this webinar, giving the floor. I don't know, Frederica, do you want to say anything else? Otherwise, Gautam.
Yeah, I'm very glad that in this year where we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, we have you, Gautam Narasimhan, Senior Advisor on Climate, Energy and Environment from UNICEF, support this webinar through your intervention. Can you unmute yourself?
I can, and can you hear me?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you, first of all, very much to all of you for your opportunity and the opportunity to input. The point was made during the introduction, but it bears repeating again that children are the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation, and that is something that grounds a lot of what we do. I mean, children are the most vulnerable to the immediate impacts of climate-forced disasters. They are more vulnerable to droughts, to floods, to natural disasters. They're the most vulnerable to the intermediate impacts when things like their water and sanitation systems, when their health systems, when their education systems are destroyed as a result of climate change or can no longer function. And we know that these disruptions, while initially temporary, become long-lasting and have lifelong effects on a children's life. I mean, when a child is forced to be out of school after one disaster, after two disasters, the evidence shows that the chances of them returning to full-time education is significantly lessened. Similarly, the chances of them having a full and healthy life when their ability to have health care in the first few years of their life is compromised is significantly lessened. They're more, as we said, they're more vulnerable to the immediate impacts, the intermediate impacts, and also the intergenerational impacts. I mean, we shouldn't forget that when we talk about climate change, it is also it's an issue of equity. It is the poorest children that are affected the most. And as these children are affected and the cycles of poverty perpetuate as a result of climate change, climate change is contributing to a world that is more unequal for our children, and we must remember that. Now, I was asked a little bit to speak, and Katerina introduced this topic very eloquently as a concept of grounding a lot of our response for climate change in the issue of a child's rights. And why do we do that? It is because the Convention on the Rights of the Child is the most ratified human rights treaty in the world. And therefore, by anchoring some of our responses in the CRC, we have a legal basis to ask, enforce, and advocate member states to act. We also have a basis to monitor and evaluate because there are mechanisms already in place to see how the CRC is being implemented. We have the ability, and also it is important to know that the CRC presents a different angle for climate action, because far too often the conversation about climate change gets bogged down into issues such as, well, what is the carbon budget of X and whether the reductions of Y are going to occur. And we forget the fundamental issue that this affects the rights of a child. And again, the video just went blank. Can everybody still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Katerina also introduced some of the rights of a child that are most directly affected by climate change, and there's been an eloquent mapping done, and there's been over 15 or 17 of the articles in the CRC of the rights of the child that are directly affected by climate change. For example, the most immediate one is Article 6, the right to survival and development. As we've talked about, a child's right to survival is directly challenged by an increasing climate-related disasters and the increased risk of disease and hunger as a result of climate change. There is the right to the adequate standard of living, and climate-induced sea level rises, flooding, extreme weather events, as well as the loss of infrastructure, the loss of educational and health opportunities create unsafe living conditions for children. We've talked about the right to education, and every child has the right to an education, and we know that education is one of the best ways to escape poverty, and poverty is one of the best ways to address climate change. We also know that and importantly, when we're talking about sea level rise, we're not just talking about cities such as New York, where I'm based, where it calls for improvements in infrastructure. We're talking about entire communities being wiped out, for example, in the Pacific Islands. And this directly threatens the rights of indigenous people to their culture and language. So by anchoring our response to climate change and especially the lens of a child to climate change in the arts of the CRC gives us a powerful mechanism and a powerful legal mechanism both to force countries to act, corporations to act, as well as to have a monitoring and evaluation mechanism in place. Now, very importantly, we can talk a little bit more during questions, though, if at all useful, about what UNICEF's wider response to climate change is. But on one area that we'd like to focus on, particularly today, is the rights of children to make their voices heard in the climate and environmental debates, and not just be seen as passive victims, but as active agents of change. And this has been evidenced. I mean, we can see we can see more and more, and especially in the news lately, about, for example, the climate marchers, where children are standing up and demanding that the world act and to do what adults fail to be doing for themselves, and to make the case that what adults are doing through climate policies and through climate actions is endangering a future for themselves. Our justification, and for the record, UNICEF, as does the UN, as does the Secretary General, supports the rights of children to participate in these marches. And quite recently, over 20 country offices through UNICEF support, in addition to our national committees, have encouraged children and young people to march for the sake of their rights when it came to climate. When it came to the last marches 2 weeks ago, there were over 20 country offices that participated with UNICEF support. We ensured that we could leverage, and I hate that word, we could use our global platforms for communication, for advocacy, to ensure that the children in these country offices, and indeed marches across the world, weren't only occurring in isolation, but the children who participated recognized that they were part of a global movement. And again, it's important here to anchor this in the rights of a child. Now, when questions arise as to whether or not children have the right have the right for these marches, very much so, absolutely. Children's participations on issues that affect them is part of their fundamental rights, as set by Article 12 of the CRC. Furthermore, children have the right to the freedom of association, which is Article 15 of the CRC. Children have a right to education, which we've talked about, and education, we should remember, is not just formal education that you receive in a classroom, but the education that one receives from being an active participant in policy issues and issues that affect them as a member of the community. And therefore, for this reason, UNICEF has supported these climate marches and continues to view the participation of children and young people as an essential part of climate response. I'll stop there because I know I've rambled on for a bit. I can speak a little bit broader about UNICEF's broader response to climate change, a little more about the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation upon children particularly. But if it's all right, I'll just pause now and see if there are any questions. Katrina, I believe that we suggested that I pause and have a couple of minutes of questions before we move on.
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually the same structure we're going to follow for every speaker. So after each speaker, people will have a chance to ask questions. If there is any question now for Gautam.
And so if you have a question for Gautam, please unmute yourself. Or if you have difficulties unmuting yourself, please send me a note in the chat section and I can unmute you from here. Okay, so Gautam, I have actually a question, as I don't see any question. It could be for technical reasons, because I know that several people had issues. But as we wait for possible questions, can you let me know if UNICEF recognizes the impact of climate as a psychological violence to children? The fact that teenagers are marching in the streets and expressing their fear for the future, is that recognized as a form of psychological violence to children, or not yet in the CRC spheres and discussions?
To my knowledge, and Katerina would probably know a bit more, I feel that has been introduced in the debates, but hasn't yet formed a central part of it. The impacts thus far that have formed a central part of the debate have been around the physical effects of the children. The psychological effects have been recognized through things such as loss of longer-term well-being. But in terms of express associations for psychological effects, I haven't seen that be an essential part of the debate, but mentioned in discussions.
Can I just complement this? Because I think, yes, on one hand, you're right, because I haven't seen it also linked in specifically to the climate change discourse, but it is true. I work a lot on faith-based engagement, and I have seen very much in that area the mention of the role specifically that faith-based communities can play in supporting children psychologically after in emergency situations. So I would think that is very much the link is where disaster strikes, and we all know how much climate has a negative impact on that. Churches are there to support children psychologically. So I think it is the link has not been made yet as such, but I think we are getting there because it's very close.
And to add to what Katerina was saying, that's a link that again is being mentioned. The link of psychological trauma and impact upon children as a result of natural disasters is an essential part of. I mean, is increasingly understood, an essential part of UNICEF's response. And as Katerina mentioned, as climate change is a driver of natural disasters, and the frequency and intensity of these disasters increase as a result of climate change. However, when it comes to the psychological impact, particularly of climate change, for example, how do children feel directly about climate change from the sense of how is their psychological makeup affected, thinking that the world as they know it may not exist as they become adults? That is still poorly understood. However, we do know that this is the issue that children place near or at the top of the list of the concerns they're most concerned about.
Thank you very much, Gautam. One more checking of if there is any participant who would like to ask a question to Gautam before we move to the presentation from the United Nations Environment Programme given by Iyad Abu Mogli. But if you would still like to ask a question to Gautam, please raise your hand or speak now by unmuting yourself. As I don't hear questions, thank you very much, Gautam. And Iyad, I'm now asking you to confirm if you can see your slides, if you can change them, and if you are unmuted.
I am unmuted and I can see my slide.
Wonderful, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Over to you. Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm very pleased and thankful that you have given us this opportunity to talk about such an important subject. I will talk a little bit about the initiative that we are launching, or we have launched for a couple of years now from UN Environment, but I would specifically touch upon our relationship and our activities and partnerships with young people and for young people. And of course, I am aware that there are different definitions for youth and children and adolescents and so on and so forth. But for us, we are considering young people, I believe, from the age of 15 until the age of 29. So this is the group that we have been engaging with. So generally, as everybody has been saying for several years now, we are in an unprecedented era where we are facing a multitude of challenges at the global level, but it is having impacts on even the smallest local communities. And for that purpose, of course, the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs have been developed and adopted by 193 countries and so on. But also, we recognize that governments working alone will not be able to achieve the SDGs. So therefore, the partnerships with stakeholders, the private sector, the civil society is very much important. And from that perspective, we looked at the spectrum of civil society organizations who are effective and active in promoting sustainable development in its different components, and even in a broader sense than the SDGs. Because the SDGs, well, they cover most of the challenges that we face, but they do not cover everything. So there are organizations out there that have been working for centuries on providing better lives and livelihoods for the people. And that's meaning faith-based organizations who have existed for several centuries and have been supporting people in improving their lives. So from that perspective, we launched the Faith for Earth initiative, which is mainly aiming to engage with faith-based organizations. And the strategy that we have developed for the initiative has three main goals. The first one is on empowering leadership and inspiring and be inspired actually by faith leaders. So we want to have vocal faith leaders around the world from different religions, different faiths, to speak up about environmental challenges and their impact on the people and their prosperity. And the second objective is working with financial and investment institutions of faith-based organizations. It's becoming a very well-known fact that faith-based organizations are the fourth largest economic power on earth. They have assets of trillions of dollars, and they do invest, as Isabel mentioned, in actually environmentally degrading industries like oil and gas, for example. But it is not limited to oil and gas, and they invest in industries that emit different types of pollution, whether it is gaseous or liquid or solid. So they do contribute to environmental degradation. So the main idea is actually to have those investments directed towards sustainability and contributing to financing sustainable development. In addition to greening the assets of those organizations themselves, if we are preaching to the people that we have to use sustainable building codes, for example, in our own buildings of houses of worship or organizations, we should as well adopt these principles to be models for others to follow suit. And the third goal is on linking the scientific evidence to the theological thinking or the scripts of different faiths. Of course, you can identify easily from the scripts of any of the globally known faiths something related to environmental responsibility for environmental protection and how we have been created as stewards or khalifas, or we are responsible for keeping earth as we have received it from God as a gift. So we are trying to link that to the scientific evidence that has been provided by institutions like UN Environment, for example, on different subjects, on climate change, on consumption and production, on air pollution, and what have you. So making the knowledge available to for easy access by faith leaders to be used in their preaches and their campaigns. Now, talking about youth and young people and looking at the assets of faith-based organizations, of course, we know that faith organizations own 8% of habitable land on earth. They own 5% of commercial forests and so on. But also they own 50% of schools and 64% of schools in Africa. So they have a global outreach to children that is unprecedented, that exceeds any capability of any other institution. Now, what is the impact, the global impacts of climate change, of environmental degradation on young people and youth? And from UNEP reports and World Health Organization, we know that there are 360,000 child deaths every year from diarrhea. And there are 300,000 deaths of children under the age of 5 because of malaria. There are also 300 or 3 million deaths on an annual basis because of different environmental issues. So the challenge is humongous. It's beyond the approach of one single organization such as the World Health Organization or the World Environment or the UN environment. So therefore, we need to cooperate and collaborate with those who have the outreach. For example, faith-based organizations who can reach out to young people and work with them. Now, what are the potentials for the involvement of young people? There are different aspects. We had a young champion who have participated in our UN Environment Assembly who said we are 50% of the world, but we are 100% of the future. This was Rebecca Freitag, the youth delegate for sustainable development from Germany. So we need the voices of youth to be on the table. So in the decision making, we want them to have a seat in making decisions. We want them to be able to elect their leaders, whether it is president of a country or whether it is a municipality leader or what have you. They have the voice to change, so they can have impact on decision making. They, even if they cannot, because of their age, they cannot participate in elections, they can do decisions at their neighborhood level, in their streets and neighborhood and around the areas. So they can make decisions and change things around. Of course, we can engage them in schools and after schools curricula and out of curricula activities where they can participate in tree planting, cleaning up campaigns, and what have you. And of course, the campaigns, the advocacy that has already been mentioned is humongous and is having impact, and we need to maximize that. And we often forget the voluntarism, which is very important and will lead to further impacts. And finally, the last slide is about what UNEP has been doing over the years with young people and youth organizations. And we have started that in 1985 when we had the International Year of Youth. And then we established what was called as TUNZA, which is a network of thousands of youth organizations working on environmental issues. There was a youth declaration on environment in 2011, leading up to the 2012 Rio Plus 20 Global Conference. And we have been publishing a special global environment outlook reports for youth and with youth. So it is not only targeting them, but is being written by young people presenting their perspectives and how they handle environmental issues and what are the priority environmental issues for them. Of course, we have the young champions of the environment on a regional and global levels. Every year we select 6 or 7 champions who have contributed to making a difference on environmental issues. And finally, we launch a number of training campaigns like the MOOCs, like the Interfaith Youth Council Conference in Kenya that we're organizing in October, and the Vatican Laudato Si International Conference that will be held on the 15th and 16th of July in Nairobi, focusing on young people, where we, with the Vatican and our partners, are inviting 300 young people to commit their activities and actions towards environmental sustainability. And finally, we are publishing a Faith for Earth publication, a call for action with Yale University and the Parliament of World Religions that will be used as a textbook for schools and universities. So I end here, and I hope you have questions that I can respond to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iyad, for these encouraging news and opportunities shared by UNEP. IT is looking into the question why we can't see, the cameras don't seem to be blocked. I hope we don't have a similar problem with the chat section. So this is the moment again for participants to ask back to you as presenter, any particular questions. And so everyone, if you would like to speak with Iyad, please just unmute yourself, or if you have difficulties unmuting yourself, send me a quick note. So we take a moment to look into questions and answers to Iyad, who is the Principal Coordinator, Policy and Program Division at UN Environment Program.
This is Isabel from Scotland. I'm very interested in the Faith for Earth publication and resource. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more what will be in that, and also how you will get that out to young people globally.
Right. So the Faith for Earth publication is actually a second version of what was called Earth and Faith, and it was published in the year 2000. And we found out that, of course, since 2020 years, we have had tremendous changes at the global level, whether environmental or, mentioning the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, all the findings, the IPCC report, and what have you. So we thought of republishing it with expanded version. We will have two versions. One is print out, but another one that will be web-based and will with activities and with resources and with websites and links and so on. So it would be very easy for young people to access it from their mobiles, from their screens, and what have you. So it will be a young or youth-friendly version, but of course, as I mentioned, it will be a resource book for university professors as introduction to the linkages between faith and environment and so on.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from participants to Iyad? If not, or otherwise, feel free also to send your questions in the chat section, and we will take them up later in the discussion time. I'm very happy to now move to the part where we will hear about good practices from member churches and faith communities. And Reverend Rachel Marsh, can you just confirm if you can hear us well, and if you can see your presentation, and if you have access to it? Rachel, are you there? It seems that we have difficulties with the line with Rachel Marsh, who is going to speak to us from the Green Anglicans. She's based in South Africa and coordinates the environmental network of the Anglican Church in South Africa. However, as it seems like she's at the moment not yet able to speak or unmute herself, I'm asking Fletcher if you can unmute yourself, and if you would feel ready to give your presentation first, so that in the meantime we can...
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. So it's a pleasure to be with all of you. My name is Fletcher Harper, and I'm the Executive Director of Green Faith, which is an interfaith environmental organization. We work with a wide range of spiritual and faith communities in different locations around the world to help equip and mobilize them for environmental action. And I chose on this topic of working with children and youth not to do any PowerPoint slides, but rather to speak to you directly, face to face, because I think that when it is that we work with children and youth, that kind of person-to-person connection, it's always important. It's obviously important with adults, but it makes a huge level of importance, and it's fundamental to working with children and with youth and young adults. So I'd like to invite you, if you're able to, if your bandwidth allows and if your time of day and location allows, for you to turn your cameras on so that we can see each other a little bit more, because again, that would be a way, if we were interacting with children and with youth, that we would want to operate. And it underscores the fundamental thing that's at stake in terms of responding to the climate crisis, which is our humanity and our ability to show and to demonstrate love and concern and care. So there are I'd like to talk for a couple of minutes about work that Green Faith has done working with children, and then talk a little bit about work that we've done with youth. Say a little bit about what we've learned from that body of work, and then have time for questions and for discussion. So with children, and by children, really what I'm talking about is people under the age of 12 years old. We've looked very carefully at the social science research, and it is extremely clear that for children in that age range, the primary role and responsibility of adults is to make sure that children get a chance to develop a healthy and positive and safe relationship with the environment, with the natural world. It's certainly possible, and we would certainly support 100% the rights of children to be able to participate in mobilizations and marches and public actions of various kinds, and through our work organizing faith communities to participate in the major climate marches, we've done that. But our primary role as faith communities with children in that early stage of their life is to make sure that they get a chance to know and to love the earth, to develop a positive relationship with it, and to grow into that and to connect that with their own deep sense of identity. The research, again, is very, very clear that one of the things that makes children much more likely to care about protecting the environment when they are adults is if they have been introduced to the environment by a trusted adult early in their life. So we think that our responsibility as faith leaders is clear in that regard. To that end, we've worked with a team led by a really remarkable early childhood educator named Betsy Lavella, who's developed a series of curricula and lesson plans, which we're very glad to make available, called Green Faith Kids Camps. They are designed for an interfaith audience. They include stories from Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, and Buddhist traditions. They can be adapted and modified so that they are appropriate for use in any of those one traditions, as well as being usable and available for use in a multi-faith gathering, which is how we initially designed them. And I would say that there are three things that really we found matter most in terms of the development of those materials, and Betsy Lavella gets really all of the credit for this. First of all, the activities are experiential. They involve children actively experiencing a relationship with the outdoors. Secondly, they integrate and are built around stories from sacred texts and sacred writings, because that's a way to connect children's experience of the natural world with their religious and spiritual tradition. A modification of the experiential bit that I mentioned earlier is that they are tactile. These lesson plans include children touching and feeling the natural world, because that's really important, and having time to reflect upon that. And the final bit is that they they seek to integrate a teaching of basic environmental science with ethics and spirituality, because we think that an important part of the job of faith communities is to help children in those early years in their life start to understand how a scientific and a religious and moral worldview can work together. So if anybody would like to get access to any of those lesson plans, we'll be very glad. You can email me at Fletcher, FLETCHER, at greenfaith.org, and I'll be glad to connect you with Betsy, who is very, very happy to walk through how to make use of these materials. They're available in English right now, and we're hoping over the next year or two to have them translated into some other languages, and there are more than 40 lesson plans at this point that she has. So it's a very, very robust set of resources. And so I'll close that sort of portion of what I wanted to say by saying that I think that in the midst of a time when clearly activism is more important than ever before, it's vitally important that in relationship to the environment, we as faith and spiritual communities also create time for children and places for children to be children. We believe that that is part of their right and part of our responsibility to them. The second thing I'd like to talk about is work that we've done with youth and young adults, which I would say for us has in practice meant we've done a body of work with young adults between the ages of 18 and 30, or 16 and 30. And the primary need that we find in people in that age range is, and again, developmental psychology backs this up very clearly, is these are people, and all of us were at that stage of our life, needing to understand and figure out who we are and what it is that we believe as we move towards and into adulthood. We're no longer children when we're in that age range. We're figuring out what our mature adult worldviews and values and commitments are. And so we've organized 3 convergences for youth and young adults. Oh, Rachel, you're...
We tried.
Good, sorry, there was some background noise there for a moment. We've organized 3 convergences, one that took place in Rome a couple of years ago for young adults from 30 different countries. One in Latin America that took place 2.5 years ago for youth and young adults from 17 Latin American countries, and one in the United States, which took place 2 years ago, and which included youth from 5 different countries. And what we found is really, really vitally important in those gatherings is to create space for youth and young adults to share very frankly and openly about their questions, about their own beliefs in relationship to the environment, their own personal experience of the environment, of the natural world, of questions that they may have about their religious or spiritual background and its efficacy and effectiveness in terms of dealing with environmental issues or not. It's a stage of life during which it's absolutely vital for people to have time to voice doubts or questions very, very frankly and very, very directly. And to create rituals themselves based in their own religious and spiritual traditions, but reflecting their own individual and generational perspective on how things ought to be. So creativity matters a lot, and honesty and frankness matters a lot. We also find, again, that it is a really important stage of life to have young adults interacting with adult experts so that they start to recognize that they, as rising adults, have the opportunity to engage in that kind of way, and that their voices matter, and that their perspectives and their questions and their work matters. So those three convergences were an important learning experience for us. And again, as with so much of this work, they're dependent on funding, but we're very, very keen to continue them moving into the future. In closing, just to repeat, I think that it's very important to differentiate our work with children from our work with youth and young adults. I think it's important to be aware of the psychosocial developmental needs of people in each of those age ranges, to be aware of our responsibilities as adults. And when we ask and invite children and youth and young adults into public activism, and or when they initiate that themselves, to take responsibility for making sure that they can do that in a manner that is safe and well tended, so that they have the opportunity to raise their tremendously important voices in a way that everybody can hear them and everybody can benefit from learning from and experiencing their presence. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Rachel, now we can hear you.
Am I ready to go?
Yes, I believe Fletcher has concluded his presentation, correct?
Okay, so would you like to put my PowerPoint up? Yeah. Okay, tell me when I can start.
Yes, you can.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Reverend Rachel Mash, and I'm speaking from Cape Town. I am the environmental coordinator for the Anglican Church of Southern Africa, which is 6 countries: South Africa, Swaziland, Lesotho, Namibia, Angola, Mozambique. And I'm going to speak about our work with young people and with children in what we call the Green Anglicans movement, because we believe that it is time now for the new generation to rise up. As we all know, in one generation, we as the older people have devastated the face of the earth. We are leaving our children oceans which are polluted. We are leaving our children air which they cannot breathe. We are leaving them with 1 million species at risk of extinction. This is our legacy to the younger generation. And in Exodus chapter 20, verse 5, the Bible talks about visiting the guilt of the parent upon the children, and upon the 3rd and upon the 4th generations. And this scripture is referring to our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. So the very first point when we begin to talk about climate change and children and youth is to recognize that it is an issue of intergenerational injustice. How are we responding as the Anglican Church? The first thing that we did is we created a manual of Sunday school materials. We call it Ryan the Rhino, and we have it in English and in Portuguese. It's a series of 10 lessons which are based on the story of creation and looking at how God created things that are good and how we have made a mess of them. So God created the plants and the lands and the air, and what we have done in terms of litter, in terms of climate change, in terms of wasting and polluting water, and then giving the children practical things that they can do to make a difference. One of the things that children love to do is to garden, and we believe that if they start when they are little, as Proverbs 22 says, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they were old, they will not depart from it. Once they grow to love the earth, then they will continue to love gardening. This is a project based in Mozambique, and it's called Sementillas de Deus, Little Seeds of God. And the children are encouraged every time they eat a fruit, whether it is a papaya or whether it is whatever kind of fruit, that they would keep the seeds and they would plant them. And then we have our avos from Anglicans project, encouraging kids to keep the pips from the avos and then to sprout them and grow them and to create food and trees. So we try with Ryan the Rhino, we try to make it as practical as we can. And how another chapter looks at what we've done to the earth and encourages kids to get involved in cleanups. And you find from even tiny, they actually really enjoy the cleanups. And here is a project that we did in one church. Round the corner from the church, there is a creche, which had become a dumping site, a disgusting landfill site. So the kids made a scheme and they worked out a project, and they said that they would get the municipality to take the rubbish. They would have a cleanup, they would plant plants, and then they would paint a mural. So this is a picture of the Sunday school and the little kids, the servers, who are planting and painting. And this is the after. This was the before picture, and this is the after picture. Because one of the important things with cleanups is if you clean up once, and people will continue just to throw rubbish where it was, but you need to actually reclaim what they say, renew the earth, actually reclaim that part. So we try and encourage kids as part of the program to have a campaign or an action plan that they actually do themselves, that they plan. And then the second resource that we have is our Care Procreation Youth Manual. And this is geared now for the teenagers. So they're encouraged to think a little bit more about some of the activities that they do. Of course, it must be interactive. It must be fun for the young people to enjoy it. It must be biblically based, and it's got to be practical. One of the most exciting things I think I've ever heard the young people say to us was when they said, you know, we used to go to church and now we are church. Because as they take ownership of the activities, they actually feel like now we are part of church, we are active. Then connecting young people with nature is really, really important. So we have what we call holy hikes, and just getting out in nature, having lots of fun. But a holy hike must also include some environmental spirituality. We, quite a few dioceses had them now for World Environment Day, just to get the kids to put their cell phones down and to sit for 5 minutes and to meditate on a scripture. On Sunday, we were by some trees on a mountain, and we got the kids to think about Psalm 1, where it talks about roots going down. How have the trees, the roots of the trees managed to reach living water? And then the other thing that the holy hike must also include is some environmental education, teaching the kids about biodiversity, teaching them about the impact of litter during that holy hike. If the kids are not taught to love the earth, they will not want to protect it. And you find that many young people, their closest that they get to nature is seeing it on their cell phone, on the TV screen. So one of the things that we can do is help to organize transport in order to get the kids out into nature. The other thing is that the voice of young people is rising up, and we can impact internationally. We just had the Anglican Consultative Council, which took place in Hong Kong. And as the Anglican Communion Environmental Network, we had prepared a resolution, and we decided, let's give it to the young people who are attending that consultation. So we put the young people into a WhatsApp group, and we said, guys, here's the draft resolution. You take it and you make it your own, and then put it forward. So after the resolution was passed, the Anglican Communion declared an emergency, a climate emergency. And here's a picture of the young people, young Green Anglicans, standing with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And they're not turning their backs on the Archbishop of Canterbury, but they wanted everybody to see their T-shirts. An important thing with young people is, of course, social media. We have Green Anglicans Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And I just wanted to show you in the last 28 days, you can see the posts have reached 101,000 people. So it is a potential way of getting into countries where you can't reach. We've now got 42 different countries who are on our Facebook page. So it means one's able to actually access young people. And we encourage them to be the ambassadors, to share, to create hashtags, and to encourage each other. They say that transformational change doesn't take place when individuals change. Transformational change takes place when networked individuals are changed. And that's what happens with young people, because maybe I planted one tree where my church is, and everybody says, ah, what are you doing? But if I plant a tree and I post it on Facebook, and then I get a like from Jamaica and a like from Malawi and a like from Canada, then I begin to feel that I'm doing something which is significant. So being part of a movement is actually quite exciting for people. We, as the older generation, need to recognize that we were called to be stewards of the earth, and we have failed. Now the younger generation is being called to be healers of the earth. Now, this is a challenge for our churches because we tend to be very old people centered. The leadership of the churches tend to be the priests and the archdeacons and the bishops, and the higher you get into leadership, the older you are. So what is important is that we need to change our role and to see how we can actually support the youth, the voice of young people, and empower the voice of young people to be heard. We all know about the Fridays for the Future, and we're trying to encourage the faith communities to get involved, as we have very many church schools, and hashtag Fridays for Future becoming hashtag Faith for Future. So that how do we, as the older generation, encourage those voices and enable the kids to feel that it's okay for them to attend those marches, help them with transport, with the logistics, in order for their voices to be heard. We need to remember that 50% of the population is currently young, but 100% of the future is young. So I think the role of the churches is to connect young people with nature, to connect them with environmental spirituality, to get them out into nature, to help them with environmental education, and then to empower them so that their voices can be raised up. And they must be the leaders who take us into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I don't know if Federica can still hear us and speak. Federica, are you there? Maybe she's having some technical difficulties, so let me just take the floor here to thank you, Rachel, very much. I see there was a question, but maybe let's have Professor Koshi present first, and then we'll have the questions for all three of you together. So, Professor Koshi, can you speak?
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
May I start?
Yes, Federica should be uploading your PowerPoint soon. Yes, it's loading. Are you able to scroll?
No, you have to do it there. Yes, I bring greetings from Church of South India. I am the director of the ecological concerns of Church of South India. We are working among clergy, teachers, and students. Students, we are implementing a program called the Green School Program. Through Green School Program, we are teaching the values of sustainability when they are young. Also transfer the values of sustainability to the family members through children. Enhance the respect to the nature through environmental audit. Make children eco-warriors against climate change. Learning should be a joyful experience. We are auditing air, energy, food, land, water, and waste. And students, with the help of the teachers, they are auditing these 6 factors. Through the audit, they are understanding in the, can we change the slide? They are understanding the importance of the ecological concerns. So through this program, we are implementing the green protocol of the church. The students are doing so many programs, cultural programs, among the in public places to convey the message of eco-conservation. So through the Greens program, we are conveying the message of eco-friendly constructions, water conservation, energy conservation, avoiding throwaway plastics, planting of sapling, organic farming, waste management, eco-friendly functions, eco-transportation. The outcome of the program is students transmitted these ideas to their home. They reminded family members on sustainable values in everything. The audit helped them to ask so many questions which they observed. Their knowledge enhanced and improved. Teachers and students jointly made vegetable gardens in their campus for noon meals, and they used the vegetables they got from their cultivation. Students, with the support of elders, visited the houses of nearby areas for educating them how to manage waste, converting it into fertilizers. During the heavy flood due to climate change, students collected relief materials and distributed to the relief camps. They know about adaptation and mitigation. We are making our students eco-warriors against climate change. CSI owns 1,704 primary schools and 341 high and higher secondary schools in South India. We are working to convert all the schools to green schools within 3 years. The Green School program is changing the outlook, attitude, and performance of the students and teachers. We are the change makers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Koshi. I think Frederica is having some problems with her microphone and she's not able to unmute herself. So let me just jump in. It is now the time for question and answers. I would like to thank very much, really heartfelt thanks to all three our presenters. It's great to hear best practices. It's great to hear how you churches are and faith leaders are really taking this agenda forward and how you're doing it with children. I would like to open the floor now for questions. If anyone has a question, you can either unmute yourself or you can type in chat. I see there is one question in the chat, but maybe let's ask first. Let's see if anyone else has any other question. Okay, so in the meanwhile, let me read the first question that came from Claudia Montanari from Argentina. And she's asking how this program can work in South America. I believe she typed when Rachel was presenting, but I think it's a question for all of you. And she's saying that their main problem in the communities where she is that young adults and children are living very poor and very bad, environmentally bad conditions. So she's wondering how such programs can work in very pure communities.
Did she say she's from Argentina?
Yes.
Because our Portuguese program, obviously we're working in Mozambique and Angola. And so I think it should be quite relevant for them. And it wouldn't be too difficult for somebody to translate from the Portuguese to the Spanish if she wants to have a look at the materials in Portuguese.
Right. Can you tell anything on the experience that you had in running this kind of programs in very pure communities, any of you?
We try to make sure that the program doesn't need much, and normally each session there would be an activity that you could do if you do have access to, like, say, pens and paper, and then there's an activity that you can do if you don't have access to any stationery.
Thank you. And she's also asking to Dr. Koshi if he can share the presentation in order to use it in Argentina. Yes, we will share. These presentations will be available, as well as all the materials that our presenters referred to will be uploaded on WCC webpage, and so we will talk about that later. Is there any other question?
Katarina, can you hear me now? We
Yes.
tried fixing the problem.
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And we did hear from all the presentation from Reverend Mesh, but I would like to also now invite Professor Dr. Matthew Koshi from the Church of South India to share his good practice from the Church of South India.
He did present.
Okay, I couldn't hear. Okay, wonderful. Then Athena Peralta, our WCC Program Executive for Economic and Ecological Justice. If you could please take the floor. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon, everyone, and I hope we have resolved a bit of the technical issues. This always happens. I thank you for the introduction, Frederica, and I would want to share about the roadmap for congregations, communities, and churches for an economy of life and ecological justice. This is a piece of work that was also presented at the UN Environment Assembly. And we've had quite a few dedicated people working on this, and I won't go into that now, but just to quickly say that much of this work was done by Reverend Norman Tendis for WCC. So the roadmap is a tool for congregations and communities and churches. So it's a congregational tool. And with the roadmap, we also aim to show that the way that we interact with the economy impacts creation. And the way we interact with creation also impacts the economy. But that also, the way we interact in both these realms, the economic and ecological realms, is connected to our faith. And so this is about being a good Christian, but even more than that, it's about being church. As I think I think Rachel might have also mentioned that. Ultimately, the goal of the roadmap is to help really build a strong movement of transformative faith. And no doubt children and youth have an important role to play. And indeed, they are already at the forefront of it. So the roadmap is in 4 areas, and in each of these areas gives some practical suggestions for change. It's not meant to be exhaustive, so it just gives some ideas, some recommendations for the way forward, how we as churches and communities can begin to present ourselves as beacons of change or as alternative communities. And I think this is important because, well, one, we need to be able to practice what we preach, and this is critical to being, credible role models. And as we know, children and youth need, well, adults too, need role models. And so this is this roadmap is an attempt also to address that gap. So it is, as I mentioned, in 4 parts. And the first part of the roadmap is about living in accordance with a covenant with God and creation. And under this heading, there are at least 3 areas which we have highlighted. And the first is supporting and practicing small-scale, life-giving agriculture, recognizing that food is a human right, and so forth. The other interesting area is about creating community gardens. And this means that we as churches, we have land even just around our church building itself, and these churches may be turned into these community gardens where we can, plant vegetables, medicinal herbs, rare species that will help to also contribute towards rescuing biodiversity. But at the same time, these community gardens can be wonderful meeting points, helping to strengthen relationships within the community. And it's also about, a space, particularly also for, again, young children to connect with the land, to also, it's a space where you can play, and so you also can connect with one another. It's a space where you can learn where food comes from and how to take care of creation. And so this is very much also in line with what Rachel was talking about when you mentioned the holy hikes. And I think it's really in this space, playing in nature, that we begin to really also build that connection and love for creation. And another point under this part is providing access to clean water. So I will just quickly share all these areas. The second area is about renewable energy and climate protection. So it's about, in our own church institutions, monitoring our energy consumption and also moving towards renewable energies. It's about promoting climate-friendly mobility and also dealing with energy and other materials consciously. So again, things like promoting riding bicycle sharing in our own church communities is one concrete example, and I think something where children and youth can also really play an active role. The third area is about just and sustainable consumption. I think this is really important because it's also here where we begin to teach children that economy and ecology are very much interlinked, that our consumption behavior is very much linked and has impacts on the environment. And so here we talk about buying from local producers and buying products that respect ecological and social criteria. So obviously fair traded coffee, tea, and juice, chocolates, many of these things that I think children, when you begin to introduce them to chocolate and where, how it's produced, all of these are important questions. The other point in this area is avoiding single-use articles and buying reusable products. Again, this is also an attempt to address the big issue of plastics pollution. So here again, if we can really begin to teach young persons just and sustainable consumption habits and behavior, it's really really important. And again, reusing and recycling is also part of this. The fourth area is about building economies of life. And here it's about calling upon churches and congregations to be places for moneyless interaction. So the church is a space where you don't need to buy or purchase things. The church or the congregation or community as a space without judgment when it comes to ability to pay, and therefore without exclusion. It's also about practicing alternative economic models, such as, and this roadmap does point to, again, very concrete examples and easy things that you can begin to implement in your community, such as opening what we call a free shop or a secondhand shop, which could be maybe just a shelf in your church where you put things that you don't need, and people can just take from these shelves, whether it's books or toys, clothes for children. I mean, especially clothes for children, because these are things that are quickly outgrown. So, you know, spaces where you can just unload all of these things and people can just take for free. And that's already one concrete way of practicing an alternative economic model. So finally, very quickly on networking, and I think, again, Rachel just already mentioned that it's networked individuals that really are able to promote change. And that's a key part of the roadmap as well, knowing that lifestyle changes are not enough, that we also have to begin to implement changes at a larger level. And it's when we begin to implement changes in our own small spaces that our voice promoting systemic change will be better heard. And here again, children are at the forefront already with the Fridays for Future Strikes. And I'm sure Greta Thunberg is already really a clear example and role model for this. So I think I will just quickly end here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Athena. And for such examples as those mentioned in the roadmap, I also encourage you to have a look at the websites of WCC. I'm going to show you the particular links. So the resources are on this website, oikumene.org/resources-children. And many of the resources which you have heard about today will also be uploaded there. One thing that is very interesting, particularly for church-run schools or Sunday schools, are also the carbon footprint calculators for children. And there are wonderful SDG tools produced by UNICEF for all ages, which I encourage you to largely promote. Just to mention also that for next year, we've just finalized our work planning, and we have the ambition in the Church's Commitment to Children area to ensure that over 50% of our member churches get the ILCO certification with the support of children and youth. And it would be wonderful if you could all collaborate on that. And also for all churches to use search systems such as Ecosia, which is a search system planting trees, would be a very concrete measure which we can all undertake. Now, I will, before we move to the time for discussion, I would also like to remind you of the place where you can find all the other churches which are nearby where you are. So it's the Church's Commitments to Children online platform. For the sake of time, I'm not going to flip through it right now. It will be in the follow-up materials. But I warmly encourage you to have a look, because there you may find, even within your country where you are based or in the region, partners who either can offer support on the Commitment 3 area you may be interested in, or those who are asking for support and may be interested in benefiting from your good practices. For the discussion, I would like to hand over to Rina. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Maybe first we should open the floor for questions to Athena specifically on the roadmap, in case there is any question on the roadmap?
Yeah, so and also for Fletcher Harper, I realized that we couldn't for technical hiccup reasons, we didn't make the space for the questions and answers. So I encourage you very much to ask those questions or email, as Fletcher indicated his email as well. Please go ahead with questions and answers.
Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat. Let's wait 30 more seconds for anyone to take the floor. Okay, I don't think anyone is having any questions, so I would like now to open the floor for a moderated discussion. And in doing that, I would just wanted to, as a way of I don't have the ambition of really summarizing all the wealth of experience that was shared today, but just to mention a couple of things that really struck me during all the presentations. One thing is, of course, the fact that churches are in communities, and they are the communities, and so they are their strength lies in being there at the local level, and that's where a lot of impact can be achieved. At the same time, though, as Rachel reminded us, with that picture of the Archbishop of Canterbury, you also are a part of networks. You are part of a movement, and you can have an impact internationally. So that's and that's why more and more that's why the UN itself is recognizing this, and it's investing, as our colleague Iyad from UNEP was mentioning, investing very much in faith communities. So this is, I think, this dichotomy between being present at the local level, but at the same time having an international reach, is what really makes you and your congregations unique. So in opening the floor for discussion, I wanted to to pose a question actually to all of you. One question is really for us, for Frederick and myself, and for our the directors of our organizations to really lead our engagement, because there are many areas that we could invest on, and we would like to know from you, what do you think we should prioritize? What is the area that churches need more help with? Concrete ways in which we could help your daily challenges. So that's a question that I have for everyone, and anyone is welcome to take the floor now and contribute to the discussion with reflections or questions. And you are also more than welcome to share any experience that you might have in your churches. We wanted to showcase today 3 examples that we thought were particularly promising, but we don't have, we are very well aware that we don't have an overview of everything that is going on, and there are many other things that are worth sharing. So please don't be shy and share if you have anything that is worth sharing.
And please remember to unmute yourself. If you have difficulties, please send a note in the chat section.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question.
I have the pleasure to also tell you that our Deputy General Secretary, Professor Dr. Isabel Piri, is back with us now, and I'm giving her the floor.
Yeah, at the moment I'm working on a paper that looks at climate change and women. So for this conversation, I'm just looking at the girl child. The girl child who is involved in firewood collection, the girl child who goes to fetch water. Is there a program anywhere in the world that is directed to the girl child in contribution towards climate justice, but also what is it that the girl child herself can do to address these issues that we are mentioning. Because the girl child is also the one who will be cooking the food with the mother. Yeah.
Yes, so I think in the resources which we have received so far, and which are not yet all uploaded, there were some examples, particularly on the girl child. So I will be uploading these as soon as possible. And if among the participants here there are some which are particularly experienced in this area, if you would like to comment. I think this is a very important point in the reality of such a large number of girls worldwide. And maybe UNICEF has some strategic guidance on this or particular programs. Katharina, are you familiar with these?
Sorry,
Can I say something about
the many questions that are coming via chat. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I just wanted to find out whether there are some projects that are specifically addressing the girl child, considering that the girl child is the one who goes to fetch water, goes to collect firewood, and is involved in cooking with the mother. Yeah.
Yes,
so,
definitely. There is, as you rightly point out, there is a lot of overlap. The intersection between gender and climate is very evident, as you are rightly pointing out. Children are the most vulnerable to the impact of climate, and among children, girls are definitely the most vulnerable. So that this vulnerability is definitely recognized and specifically targeted in our responses as the UN. I see that there are a lot of questions that are coming via chat. The first question is from Brooke Benz, and who is saying about, it's curious to hear how they see and understand what fundamentally motivates children and youth to address climate change. How are they finding meaning and purpose? How are they connecting this to their faith? Yes, it's about what motivates children, and this links also to what Federico was saying at the beginning about this anxiety that children are experiencing in seeing their livelihood, their future threatened. And then there is Yvette. Let me just read all the questions, and then all the panelists can answer. Yvette was just sharing an experience from the United Church in Jamaica and the Cayman Island. She's saying that the new moderator, Reverend Dr. Gordon Cowan, has introduced a community garden. All communities are encouraged to plant these gardens, and they ban single-use plastic. So this is sharing. Thank you, Yvette, for sharing these concrete examples of what you're doing in Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. And there was a question specifically to Athena about COP in Chile, and if there was some activities from WCC to young local people.
In Chile?
And yes,
referring to the COP, involvement of people in the COP.
Yeah. You want to comment on that? And also, did you already refer to Bernd Bruck's question?
Yes, I did.
On to understand what fundamentally motivates children and youth to address climate change. How are they finding meaning and purpose? How are they connecting this to their faith? Rachel, would you like to give an answer to that particular question based on your...
Sorry, what was the question? I couldn't hear.
How do the children find meaning and purpose in what motivates them fundamentally to address climate change. You mentioned this new campaign called Not Fridays for Future, but Faith for Future. Could you share some observations on the children participating there? What motivates them, and how does this give meaning and purpose to them? How do they connect to their faith?
Yeah, we just had a gathering of our young, what we call movers and shakers. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And so we asked them what for them is the primary motivation to be involved in this movement. And the number one reason that they gave, and these are people in their 20s, they're not older people. The primary motivation to be involved is that they're worried about their children's future. So that was the main primary motivation. Second motivation is they believe that God is calling them to be involved. And the third, if I can remember the order, the third motivation is they're worried about the impact economically, that it will increase poverty. And the fourth motive, yeah, but those were the top ones. So but the primary one was they're worried about the future of their as yet unborn children. So they're already seeing that intergenerational thing.
Mm-hmm. I can also add that I saw a study recently, published a few weeks ago, on the fact that those who are engaged in concrete answers to the climate and environmental threat feel stronger and more positive, because there was a former UNICEF study, but that was many years ago, on how children feel strong anxiety because of the situation of environment. And it seems that if they are given concrete ways to give an answer and act, it reduces the mental health issues which can be also associated with the children who feel scared about what's happening. I see a question from Marsha, not sure if you read that, also thanking you, Fletcher, and asking you, Fletcher, if you organized meetings in Rome, Latin America, and in the USA, and who helped fund them. Is that already correct? No. Fletcher, are you still there? I'm not sure if Fletcher can hear us, but we will make sure that question gets answered in our follow-up message, in which we'll also share all the presentations and the relevant materials. I also would like to see, Iyad, if you are still there, could you say something more about the very soon coming up conference on Laudato Si? Just the specific dates and what participants and member churches could do around that, and how it could be beneficial for their efforts with children and youth?
And,
yes, definitely. Well, yes.
Go ahead, Iyad, please.
Okay. Well, the fourth anniversary of Laudato Si, which is the second international conference. The first one was held at the Vatican last year, and this year it will be held at UNEP premises in our offices on the 15th and 16th of July. And we are going to be inviting around 300 participants, mostly young people from Africa. So we're focusing on youth and on Africa, but of course it will be a global meeting inviting people from different faiths. So it's an interfaith dialogue as well. It's not going to be focusing on the Catholic, constituency, but being organized by the Vatican in collaboration with the WWF and SINESA, which is the Catholic Young Network on Environmental Sustainability for Africa, and UN Environment. So we have just sent out invitation for people to save the date and register. So I invite everybody who is interested to please go and register. It will be a great opportunity that we all take this as an urgent call for action, especially by young people.
Dr. Iyad, can you tell us a bit about the cost of the Is there any funding for people to get there? Is there any costs of the conference?
Yes, well, the cost for participation for most of the people will be covered by the Vatican, as was done last year at the Vatican when it was held in Rome. So accommodation and tickets will be provided mostly for young people.
So
of course, we are opening
for,
it up for others.
Tickets from across
Yes,
Africa?
Tickets. Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, because I was only sending it to people in Kenya, so I can send it to people across Africa.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool, wonderful.
And there's one more question also for you, Iyad, from David Patterson. With regards to faith organizations' investment in fossil fuels, what would you say to faith organizations who are reluctant to divest from fossil fuels? Example, they would rather maintain investment in these companies and encourage them to become more ethical, I guess. How do you encourage people to divest?
Right. Well, I answered at the chat, but of course, as I mentioned, it is very difficult and very challenging because we are talking about organizations that invest in billions of dollars. So if we're talking about, for example, the Bank of the Vatican, it is investing $30 billion. If we are talking about the Islamic Development Bank, their assets are $70 billion. If we're talking about the Church of England, it is almost $30 billion. So we are talking about a humongous amount of money that cannot easily be greened. So what we're saying, there are examples out there. For example, the UNEP FI, which is the finance initiative of UNEP that started in 1992, has been working with 250 commercial banks, greening their investments and assets. So if commercial banks have been able to do it, to divest from environmentally degrading investments, why faith investment corporations cannot? So the example is there, the successes are there, the guidelines is there, the knowledge, the resources, everything is there. We just need a global campaign that will, pressure and put a pressure on those who are investing in environmentally degrading investments to shift, and the alternatives are there. As Antonio Guterres said once, the Stone Age did not end because of the lack of stones, but because of the existence of alternatives. And this is exactly it. Today, we have alternatives for fossil fuel. We have renewable energy sources. It is moving very fast, and it is very cost effective nowadays, and it might even surpass the cost of oil and gas energy sources.
Thank you very much. I see it is already past the time, and so I also see Katharina cannot unmute herself, which is very unfortunate as we are moderating together. I hope she can connect back for us to close together. I would just like to give for the ending one quote from a child in South Africa who was participating in the consultations when we drafted the Church's commitment to children. There were 144 children who contributed to developing this consensus document, and one said very strongly, "What would Jesus think about how we treat the earth?" I believe the energy and the innovations from young people and children are really key in the solution to the challenges faced today, and I'm so grateful that there are so many of you out there doing their utmost to support them. It is impressive how from when we started this program only about 3-4 years ago, we now have already over 100 supporters implementing the church commitments to children. With the developments of the Fridays for Future and now Faith for Future and all these things happening, I think there is really strong chance for miracles to happen and this crisis to be turned into a major opportunity. Thank you so much for this collaboration, and please watch out for the follow-up materials which will contain all the important links and presentations. Katharina, are you back online? So
Yes, I am.
Wonderful.
Yes, I am. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone, all the presenters. It's really inspiring to hear what is happening already on the ground, and I hope that many churches got to hear, to listen to your experiences and to be inspired by them. I would like to thank Friederike for organizing and co-leading this webinar. I know it takes some work to pull this up. Isabel as well, and everybody from WCC, who is very always very supportive and available, and who doesn't stop pushing even us to do more and to be even more ambitious and take up new initiatives. So thank you very much, everybody. We'll continue with another webinar in the next 2-3 months.
Okay. Thank you so much. And Isabel, again, thank you for all the directions you gave in the opening and strong opportunities for systems to change as the young people ask for us. Thank you.